Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to take another look at our fundamentals demo, and specifically, we are going to take a look at the concept of a buffered reader. And we're going to use this buffer reader in conjunction with a file reader for this video. So this video assumes that you've already watched the demo on the file reader, as well as have some basic understanding of file I/O, whether it's in C or in Java. So to begin with, what we want to do is we want to create a little demo or helper function that will allow for us just to test the functionality of the buffer reader in isolation. So we don't need this function to be very fancy. As a matter of fact, we're not going to accept any input arguments and we're not going to return any arguments. We're simply going to use it to read a text file. And so to begin, what we want to do is scroll down past your main, and pretty much in the same location that you've created your file reader demo, we're going to turn around and we're going to create another public static void function or method, with this one being the name BufferedReaderDemo. And again, we're not going to accept any input arguments. Before you forget, go ahead and put our comment block in place that we can fill out later on. And if anything, you can go ahead and take another look at your file reader demo to understand some of the basic principles of the file reader. And specifically, what we want to do is we want to leverage a java.io.file as well as a file reader object to now read through the contents of a hard-coded text file. In the earlier video, I used a sample.txt. We'll use the same sample.txt in this video. So again, what we want to do is make a quick note here that the idea is I want to use a buffered reader to read the contents of a text file. Now, again, there's nothing magic about a text file. It just makes something convenient for us to read. But more importantly, what we want to do is focus on why a buffered reader. Well, a buffered reader differs from a regular file reader in that it gives us some extra functions to work with the file. So in other words, we can pull an entire line out of a file instead of having to do it character by character. And as a matter of fact, we can actually specify how many characters we wish to read out of the file at one time. What it does is it just gives us a stronger set of tools to be able to deal with file I/O. And so to begin with, what we want to do is start off by creating a file, and we're again going to call it an input file. We are also going to go ahead and create a file reader that we are again going to call input file reader. These variables probably going to get a little long on us here. And then additionally, we want to have a buffered reader. And we're going to call that one input buffered reader. Now, we've seen how to work with the java.io.file reader before, and hopefully you've also experienced how to deal with the java.io.file writer. And in both cases, you know that you have to have a try-catch block to be able to capture any exceptions that might happen while you are reading or writing from a file. To begin with, though, what we want to do is leverage our input file. And since we're hard coding this, there's no way to capture it necessarily from the user, either through function signature, or we could possibly have used a scanner, but for right now, we're going to keep this simple. And we're simply going to specify sample.txt as our input file. Now, since we know that we're going to need this, we'll go ahead and set up our try-catch block. And we're just going to catch any exception that is being thrown. And then what we'll do is we'll simply print out an error to the user, something along the lines of failed to open file, as well as the toString method for your exception. Now, in addition to being able to create the input file object, we can now use this input file in our logic by just simply checking to see if our input file already exists. And if it already exists, we can attempt now to open it. And in the event that it does not, we simply go ahead and print another message out to the user, error or even a warning, file does not exist. And then at this point, we can push our try catch block inside of our if statement. Now, if you were following along in the earlier video on the file reader demo, you know that I did it a little bit differently. As a matter of fact, I actually put the if statement inside of the try catch block, and I'm doing it intentionally different here just to show you that in both cases, it will work. It doesn't really matter whether you have the try catch inside of the if statement, because our input file object is not likely to throw an exception, or if it does, it's something that truly is unexpected. So at this point, though, once we've managed to get inside the true branch of the if statement, and now we are inside of our try catch block, we can leverage our input file object to now initialize, using a constructor, our file reader. And so in this case, we're just going to say file reader is equal to new java.io.fileReader. And for the input argument, then we're just simply going to specify our input file object. Now, if you'll notice here, we're getting a warning, and that is because I have accidentally forgotten our input file. There we go. So input file reader is the variable name. At this point now, what we can do is leverage our input buffered reader. And again, we're going to use our new constructor, new java.io.bufferedReader. And you'll notice that we've got a couple options as far as our overloads. The one that we're interested in is going to be the reader as the input argument to the constructor. The second one allows for you to specify the size of the buffer to be read in. In other words, if you, for instance, are expecting only a certain amount of data, this would be a great alternative. As a matter of fact, it's going to stop once it reaches that amount of data. And in this case, though, we don't have that luxury, or we don't know how big the file is going to be. And what we want to do is we simply want to leverage our buffered reader to now be able to read in the contents of the file line by line. Now, before we go any further, in the reverse order, you'll notice that both the input buffered reader has a close method, as well as our input file reader has a close method. So it's a good habit for you to get into to close both your buffered reader as well as your file reader. Now, in the earlier video, we explored the options with the file reader, and you saw that you could pick characters out one character at a time until you reached the end of file, which would essentially be the end of stream, and you would get a -1 as a return integer value. With the buffered reader, slightly different process. And so what we can do is we can look at the options for the input buffered reader, and you'll notice that there is again a read, and that read will behave very similarly to the file reader, with the difference being the values that can be returned, but also it has a -1 if the end of the stream has been reached. So in other words, you could use the exact same logic there if we wanted to. And you, of course, have the read option, with the character buffer, the character array, and so on. But what we're really interested in is the ability to read a line. Now, this allows for us to continue to read all the way until the end of line character is reached in a given character string. So in the case of some of our output examples from earlier videos where our data was line by line, this would probably be a really good option. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to leverage our sample.txt, which you saw in an earlier video, and we're going to go ahead and just pull up the contents here. And so it's got varying different lengths. As a matter of fact, there's only a couple of lines in this file the way that it's written. So it's going to be real interesting to see how this works. Now, the other thing to note is when you do use the read line, you'll notice that it returns a string where the read returns an integer. And what we want to do now is we want to find a way to store the entire string that is read using the read line function. And so what we'll do is create a temporary variable up here, rather the local variable. We're going to call it java.lang.string. And very unceremoniously, we will call it a line. And you can go ahead and initialize it using double quotes. And then what we'll do is we'll once again have the same rough structure. We'll have a while loop. We'll use that line variable to be the recipient of the input buffered reader's read line method. And again, what you want to do is make sure to match up your parentheses correctly. And while this is not equal to null, we want to read and display the contents of the file line by line. And to do so, we could again use our system.out, and we could either use our print line or our printf. In which case, if we did our printf, we'll simply have a %s followed by a new line, and then our line variable. Now, one thing that I think would probably be a little more interesting in this particular example is if we went ahead and leveraged not only the string itself or the line itself, but what if we also specified the length? And so I'm going to add one more little piece of information here. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and put in contents here, and then you can use this really as a general purpose little helper function. I'm going to try to line this up. And then this will simply be line dot length. And what we're going to do is we're going to leverage then that method associated with our string that has been read out of our file. At this point, let's go ahead and build it. Let's make sure that we've got working code. Come back up to your main. Once again, add one more branch onto our else if. So args.length equal to 1. And our args 0 dot equal ignore case. And at this time around this point, it's going to be our file, or rather our buffered reader demo. And if that is equal to true, then we simply want to make a quick call to our fundamentals demo dot buffered reader demo. Again, we'll build it. Come back out here to our command window. We'll change our file reader demo to buffered reader demo. And It really is kind of a little hard to read on this particular example here, but you'll see that there is that first sentence. There's a lot to it, but notice there was no new line character in it. You can go back and verify the text file if you want to, and you'll know that there are 976 characters based on the string length that was read out. Then there is that empty line. And so that empty line, because all it had was a new line in it, then is a 0 length string followed by another block of text, another 712 characters. And then finally, we have our end of file. Notice our end of file doesn't get picked up by our read line. Now we can vary this a little bit. I'll tell you what, we probably have a couple of extra files here that we can use. As a matter of fact, we can borrow one of the files. Perhaps we could borrow our users.csv from an earlier video. And what I'd like to do as an alternate example is I'm just going to go ahead and use the users.csv. And again, notice here that it doesn't matter if it's a CSV file or a text file. Build it and then run it. You'll notice that I have every line from the file is read separately. Just for some reference here, let's go ahead and drag and drop this into NetBeans. And every line is then measured, or the length then is printed out. So you'll see that the first one's 172, second one's 172, and so on. And you'll notice that I made kind of an arbitrary change in my user ID there, which increased the line length to 173 and then back to 172. So hopefully you see the difference, or the advantages, if you would, of using a input buffered reader, or rather a buffered reader, for reading the contents of a file. Again, it's not for every use, but in this particular example, when we're just trying to get text out of a file or get text out of a CSV file, then it is very useful. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to email me. And thank you for watching.